Our webinar today, which is jointly sponsored by UCEA and the Wallace Foundation in collaboration with NASSP and NAESP, features a new Wallace Foundation report, Making Time for Instructional Leadership. Many of you know that in recent years we've seen growing agreement among the academic researchers, policymakers, and educational leaders about the need for principals to engage in instructional leadership. In fact, the term instructional leadership has been promoted as a goal towards which principals and other educational leaders should aspire over all others. Trends towards teacher accountability in federal and state education policy have only amplified the pressure on principals to engage in more heavily in instructional matters and increase the amount of time that they spend in the classroom and working with teachers. Our guests today include two celebrated principals known for their instructional leadership expertise. They will discuss strategies they use to implement instructional leadership behaviors in their schools and the lessons that they've learned for overcoming obstacles that limit their time that they can spend on instructional leadership. Joining us are Robin Conrad Hansen, and she is the president of the National Association for Elementary School Principals and a recipient of the National Distinguished Principal Award. Robin was the principal of Playa del Rey Elementary School in Gilbert, Arizona, and holds a doctorate in educational leadership. Michael Allison is also joining us today. He's the president of the National Association of Secondary School Principals and is principal at Hopewell High School in Aliquippa, Pennsylvania. Did I say that correctly, Michael?
Yes, you did.
I should have checked that with you earlier. Michael has been a Pennsylvania educational leader since 1988 and has a history of involvement in state and national advocacy efforts. Also joining us is widely recognized scholar of educational leadership and the co-author of the Wallace Foundation report, Making Time for Instructional Leadership, Joseph Murphy. Joe Murphy is an associate dean at the Peabody College of Education of Vanderbilt University and the co-author of the recent Wallace Foundation report, Making Time for Instructional Leadership. In the public schools, Joe has served as an administrator of the school, district, and state levels, and Joe joins the conversation to discuss what his research team has found and to offer valuable insight into the school administrator management process, which is also known as SAM. On behalf of UCA, a warm welcome to each of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're going to devote our time this afternoon on this webinar to a discussion about the practical challenges that principals face when attempting to increase time devoted to instructional leadership, as well as strategies for supporting principals in a climate of evolving roles and responsibilities. We're going to start with Robin Conrad Hansen. And Robin, we understand that you have been in education for 34 years, with 26 years of those being dedicated to school administration at the high school, junior high, and elementary school levels. So we'd like to ask you first, what do you think of when you hear the term instructional leadership? And do you think of yourself as an instructional leader?
Very good question. First thing I think about is that the instructional leader is the lead learner in the building. I do see myself as the instructional leader of my building, and with that, the responsibilities that go along with it. And we need to ensure that students are receiving high-quality instruction every day by highly qualified teachers and staff. So that's my paramount role as a building-level principal.
And Robin, would you say that since taking your first leadership position, that the amount of time that you devote to leadership, in particular instructional leadership, has increased?
Yes, that time has increased probably at least 3 times what I used to be in the classroom. Some of that time differential, I think, becomes that I've spread out from the high school to the middle school now to the elementary. So for the last 15 years, I've been focused at the elementary level as the growth of teacher evaluation and instructional leadership has really come to a peak. But we have spent increased time in the classroom, increased time in professional development where we're able to grow our own skills as an instructional leader, because some of us, we all come into this job with different backgrounds and more years in the classroom than others. So the strategies that I have learned from professional development has been increasingly beneficial to the time that I spend in the classroom and then my coaching ability. And that's how I think of it as being the instructional leader as well, is that you need to maintain and have those skills so then you're better able to coach your staff.
So if I heard you correctly, it sounds like to you, instructional leadership involves being in the classroom with your teachers, developing professional development opportunities for them that meet their needs, and then also providing them with coaching. Would you say that that's accurate? And are there other things that you do that you feel like also can be categorized as instructional leadership?
Yes, I think you've categorized it very well. The way that I gather the data from my staff as far as what professional development is needed is because I'm in the classrooms. You find out if you need to have more critical thinking, questioning, for example, how to use objectives better, student engagement. But I also have learned over the years that it's not a one-size-fits-all professional development. I try to offer my staff a category of choices of things that they can do to help benefit themselves. We work on goals as the lead learner in the building. I share what my goals are every year based on the data that comes in. I ask my staff to do the same thing, and then we actually ask the students to also set goals based on their learning performance from the previous year and review them. But one of the things that it's allowed me to do this, it's very similar to Sam, is that I started doing shared leadership model at my campus about a decade ago. And 2 years ago, we've now taken that into a distributive leadership model because I can't do that job by myself as far as running the school, all the standards that you know of as the former ISLIC standards, which they've now been refreshed to be the professional leadership standards. You can't do that job by yourself. And I have a school, it used to be 1,200 students, no assistant principal, so it was a tremendous job just to get the day-to-day tasks completed, let alone getting into classrooms as the instructional leader. So by having a shared leadership and now a distributive leadership model of shared leadership with my teachers, I have lead teachers that are also trained in a variety of different areas within the school functioning. That's truly what's allowed me to do a better job of being an instructional leader and then focus our professional development to really what meets the individual needs of the teachers and not having a one-size-fits-all professional development for our campus.
Thanks. That's really helpful, Robin. You know, your mention of the standards raises another question for me that you've sort of begun to unpack, and that's given that most everything that the leader does impacts instruction and student achievement in some way. How do you kind of parcel off instructional leadership from other forms of leadership? Do you feel like there's a really strong line of demarcation there?
Well, I think instructional leadership is what our schools are all about. The rest of the standards are definitely important. We have to have those in place in our schools, but we're in school because we're trying to impart knowledge onto our students. And as the lead learner on the campus, we have an awful lot to do as far as making sure that that happens. But it's almost like thematic teaching as a teacher. We're not going to do a good job at our schools unless we have a clear mission and vision with our core values. So as you're looking through the educational leadership standards that you have on the screen, all of those are important. However, I think the curriculum instruction and assessment is paramount, and everything else goes along to support that. However, understanding the newer ones that came on board, which is number 3, the equity and cultural responsiveness we have to have, professional community for teachers and staff, and having professional capacity for school personnel. One of the things that I've had to do for my own professional development is learn how adults learn. I had to have learned that to be able to do a better job as the professional development leader on the campus. So adult learning styles has also been something that many principals have had to learn more about.
Thanks. That's really helpful, Robin. Let's turn real quickly to Michael Allison. Michael, we've seen that instructional leadership can look differently in different school contexts, and Robin began to kind of talk about that a little bit, given her background. Building off of her comments, can you share what instructional leadership looks like for you at the high school level?
For sure, Michelle. I view instructional leadership as kind of like the culture of the building. That instructional leadership creates the conditions that allows instruction and learning to thrive in your school. And as a principal, I think that everything that you do creates those conditions, whether it's modeling and reinforcing the beliefs that all students can learn, promoting and reinforcing differentiated instruction, promoting the fact that students and staff learn in different ways, and the teachers need to be able to teach in different ways. I believe that as a principal, you're an instructional leader when you encourage your teachers to challenge themselves and their students by trying new strategies, the new techniques, new technology that they might not totally be comfortable with. And that when they are willing to take those risks, they know that as a school leader, you'll have their back and you'll support them when some of their efforts fail. And then, instructional leadership also goes into, more formally into the teacher supervision process. Mm-hmm. I've been a principal for approximately 18 years, and I've been lucky because I've been in a school that had a strong veteran staff, that I thought we had a lot of very good teachers. And I focused on instructional leadership as an evaluative practice, or not as an evaluative practice, but rather as a formative practice to help teachers to grow and improve their art rather than trying to evaluate and score them with a number about how well they were doing. And I think as an effective instructional leader, you need to realize that your staff is at different places in their professional development, and you need to understand how to help each individual person within their comfort zone and find ways to challenge that comfort zone, prod them along a little bit so that they have a little bit of discomfort, but that they know that you're working to help them get better and improve so that the learning can improve in the classroom.
And would you say that, given the 14 years that you've spent as a principal, that you've increased the amount of time that you've been devoting to this?
Absolutely. I think when I first started as a principal, you tend to focus more on those managerial responsibilities, but I've always believed that building the culture and climate where learning is expected, learning is a priority, those were the first steps to having a good school. I think many principals, as a result of new teacher evaluation models, many principals are finding themselves much more actively engaged and a lot more time spent on instructional leadership and having robust conversations and an increased rapport with their staff.
Just thinking about that you and Robin both have been practicing leaders for quite a significant amount of time, and certainly have taken on these roles since the ISLEC standards were first developed and began to be used within preparation programs, which probably means that you didn't necessarily get a great deal of training in your initial principalship preparation program that focused in on teacher supervision and development and that sort of thing. Is that the case? And if so, how did you develop these skills?
I'll address that. I believe that my principal preparation program did have some focus on instructional supervision, and we learned the classical things like clinical supervision and how to help teachers, how to evaluate teachers and help teachers that were struggling in more of a kind of a punitive model, I would say. I think over my career we've had opportunities to learn about things like walkthroughs and how walkthroughs impact learning. And just taking professional development opportunities based around our new evaluation system for teachers in Pennsylvania has helped me to develop a greater focus on that. I would say that reviewing the information about the SAMS program that Dr. Murphy will talk about, I think a lot of principals would require additional training in how to facilitate conversations with teachers and to really pick out all of those things that are quality instructional methods in different subject areas. You know, I was a science teacher. I feel very, very comfortable in a science classroom of evaluating what quality teaching looks like. I have a pretty good idea of what it looks like in all of the other classrooms, but I'm certainly not an expert on foreign language instruction. I'm certainly not an expert in music instruction. And I'm tasked with evaluating and leading those programs in my school. And so you need to depend on other resources to get information about that as well.
So is that what you, are you kind of speaking about the shared leadership roles that Robin was alluding to previously?
Well, you know what's hard is depending on the makeup of your school district, you know, we tend to have smaller school districts where we don't have, you know, curriculum coordinators for each subject area. I think larger school districts are better able to handle that process than smaller school districts. But I think you have to just make the effort to find out what good instruction looks like. You know, I participated in some math leadership programs. I've taken things like the Collins Writing Program. And so you start to see how those things impact learning in the classroom, and then you know that those things are looked for when you're working with and discussing learning with teachers in those classrooms.
Thanks a bunch, Michael. Robin, did you have any responses to that?
Yes, I would agree with Mike that in the very beginning, which was 30-some years ago when I took my principal prep program, there wasn't the focus on instructional leadership as what we have now. I've had the opportunity to be an associate professor for the last 16 years in Arizona and know that our principal prep programs are developing. I don't think we're at the rigor and relevance level that we need to be in our principal prep programs. They are concentrating a little bit more on what principals should know and be able to do. But we also not only need to learn theory in our principal prep programs, we need to have the opportunity for long-term time in buildings with proven leaders so we can know how to implement and put that theory into practice on a daily basis, because that's what I think is lacking in some of our principal prep programs, is that we don't have the hands-on time, and also we need to be concentrating more on what's happening in our schools today, and that's what we need to be looking more for.
Thanks. One more question before we turn to Professor Murphy and hear a little bit more about the SAMS process. Can the two of you speak to the things that you feel like really keep you from dedicating more time to instructional leadership, particular challenges that arise for you, but then also strategies, sort of like the ones that that both you, Robin and Michael, mentioned about utilizing other individuals to kind of help you with this task?
Well, I think one of the things we need to do as a strategy is hire the best people that we can have and then build the human capacity in our schools, because if our teachers are not struggling in the classroom and they're really more independent, I think that's going to free us up for more time to be able to be spent in our classroom, making sure we're using our daily time to the best of our ability. So we have time for reflective practice, for professional learning community work, because teachers are wonderful at supporting one another as well. And so if we have that feeling of collegiality within our building, that would be fantastic. The other thing that I think frees us up more is if we have good character development of our students on our campus. So if you put in some time building the climate and culture of your building, having the support from your parents and the community, you're going to be able to have less time spent on those types of tasks, student discipline, communication, if you have those as a foundation. So those are also part of the ISLIC standards. But I think, like Mike said, if you have a school that you've had the staff for a long period of time and you've built up their capacity and their potential, and you have students with a lot of respect for one another and for the teachers on campus, that's what's going to help us free up our time so we can have more time in the classroom.
Mike, anything to add?
I'll jump in with that as well. You know, I talked a little bit previously just about creating a climate and a culture in your school. And, you know, one of the things that we do is we talk all the time about that instruction begins when you walk into the classroom and it ends when it's time to leave the classroom. And kids expect that, the teachers expect that, we talk to parents about that. So, you know, that idea of bell-to-bell instruction, not only that you're going to teach that quantity of instruction, but also how do we raise the quality of that instruction as well. We talk to kids about why they're in the classroom. We try to create a culture where they respect each other, they treat each other, not only their peers, but also their teachers with respect, and we ask teachers to return that. We talk to teachers all the time about engaging students and getting them involved in authentic learning, where kids get excited about what they're doing. And when those things are going on in the classroom, it's really easy to be a principal. But the culture of the school that defines those things is important and puts student learning at the forefront, and the idea that every student not only has the ability to learn and grow as a person, but that every student in that classroom is valuable. And when you get teachers to buy into that and students to buy into that, that's really what instructional leadership's all about. And you do that through every practice that goes on in your school, whether it's walking down the hallways, whether it's doing walkthroughs in the classroom, whether it's formal clinical supervision. All of those factors reinforce those ideas every day, and that helps you to be a more effective instructional leader. I think one of the other things I would say is that you need to have an intentional focus on instructional leadership. It's easy to be distracted. So I intentionally put blocks of time on my calendar where that I have to engage in those practices on a daily basis. And I schedule them to rotate through the calendar so that I'm going into science classrooms or English classrooms. And then the other thing is, you know, utilize the other staff that you have. My assistant principal keeps me focused and constantly reminds me of what I need to do with instructional leadership, and I do the same back with him. So we support each other in that way.
Yeah, terrific. Thanks for providing some additional examples of that, Mike. That's really helpful. Let's turn to Joe now. Joe, given the amount of time that you've devoted to research on this issue over the course of your career, it's very likely that you're quite familiar with the types of points that Robin and Michael have made. But before we get into strategies, let's stop for a moment and talk a bit more about instructional leadership specifically. According to the new report co-authored by you and your colleagues at Vanderbilt, not all instructional leadership behaviors and time are created equal. What has the research told us about what kind of instructional leadership behaviors hold the most value for improving student achievement and development? Can you share some of your perspectives?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I would say I would follow up where Robin and Michael were, because the most powerful ways to move instructional leadership are to determine the set of norms that you want in your school. And Michael talked about them, and Robin talked about them. So if you want challenge, right, that's a norm. Or if you want cooperative learning, or if you want meaningful engagement from students. And remember, the average student is disengaged 50% of the day, and the teachers talk to kids 85% of the day, and 30% of the day they teach what kids already know. So I think the real issue is to before we start doing walkthroughs and poking around at the micro level, I think it's really critical to get an understanding on the big norms you're trying to get in the school. And there are 7 or 8 of those, I think, in the research that if schools would work on, they'd have pretty powerful payoff in the classrooms. The other thing I would say is I would agree 100% with Michael on this. Principals, work their tails off as it is, and they're not going to get 3 or 4 more hours of work. So the question is, how do you use the time you have well to get things done? And so pretty much every action a principal takes can take on an instructional meaning or not take on an instructional meaning. So the question is, if you get in the habit of making sure instruction is on one of your eyeballs, when you look at stuff, you're going to see it through an instructional eye. If you don't, you're just going to see it through a management eye or a facilities eye or a transportation eye or something else. But if you can take the 1,200 decisions a principal makes a day and make sure that everyone, as many of those as you can, there's an instructional eyeball on that, as well as the other stuff, then as Michael talked about, it's the day-to-day, daily, constant interactions you have, but you put an instructional spin on those.
So that's quite an interesting idea. That perspective definitely matters. How you are emphasizing, or the goals that you're emphasizing, and the work that you do that supports them is really important. I was taken also by your percentages that you shared, Joe, that are a little discouraging. 55% of the day being disengaged, 35% of the time you're teaching kids what they already know, and 85% of the time being focused on teachers talking to kids. Goodness gracious. So possibly being the scenario in a lot of our schools, so what are those 8 strategies that you mentioned briefly that leaders might be able to do to really focus in on instructional leadership and have that be the eyeball or the lens through which they're doing their work?
Yeah, I think that's the high ground for principals. I mean, I like people out in classrooms as well, but the real issue is, and a principal can do this in 2 days. This doesn't take a lot of time. So you say, we believe that kids should be engaged in the learning activity. And you can go into classrooms, and if you see the teacher talking 50, 60, 70, 80, 90% of the time, well, you almost know that the kids are not engaged in the learning. We could bet on that. Or if you say, we want one of the norms would be we want student-anchored work in our classrooms. And if you go into most classrooms and you look around, it's anything but student-anchored, right? It's company anchored by the curriculum that they make or the books they sell. And we talked about engagement. You can measure engagement pretty quickly. Watching kids and seeing what they're doing, and it seems to me that what principals need to do is what is non-negotiable are these norms that schools have to have. I agree 100%. How they can be done can vary school by school, but these norms have to come in life in the school if you're going to have if kids are going to learn. And it's these norms that I think are what I would define as the norms of powerful instruction in a school.
So, Joe, how do those norms then fit vis-a-vis with the types of strategies that you and your colleagues identified when you studied the SAMS process?
Well, the difference, I think the SAMS was studied very micro level, so I think we were actually more concerned in that study about whether it actually worked. And for SAMS, the original definition of work was, did it actually get principals more time to engage in instructional work? That was sort of the first objective that was set up, and we spent a lot of time on that. It's only in the later years, and SAM gets huge credit for this, they began to transition from more time to the use of the time, and you can see that on the model there. And this won't surprise Michelle, but Michael said it well. I mean, it boils down to the quality of instruction and the quality of culture in a school. I mean, you have 2 fingers, that's what you want to have. And I think what Sam showed is that the door for getting better in those 2 areas is opened by the SAM process.
So what exactly is the SAM process?
The SAM process was an initiative that was started in Louisville, Kentucky by a very aggressive former principal, Mark Schellinger. and he went to Wallace and he got it funded, and pretty soon, after a few years, it became its own operation. But it is a system that gives principals continual feedback, evidence-based feedback on how they're spending their time, where that time is being spent. So let's say you spend 40% of your time with teachers now, and you're having a glass of lemonade to celebrate. Well, they will tell you just spent 40% of your time with the top teachers in your school, and you ignored everybody else, right? So it gives you a level of feedback that allows you to implement instructional strategies with evidence, with an informed sense of evidence, and it kind of puts you in a bit of a straitjacket, so you do it. All right, you can't sort of get out of it in the SAM system. You have to act in that role.
So, in the SAMS process, is there a process through which, kind of like what Robin was describing, where the principal and the individuals who's serving as their coach, I assume,
Right.
Yeah, that they set goals or targets around instructional leadership, and then the individual helps them understand where and how they are or are not doing the things that enable them to meet their goals. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, that would be exactly correct. So they would tell them, and what they add now is not just how you're spending your time and where you're spending the time, but they're actually getting into the quality of the time that you are spending, and I think that's a real extension.
So in the 4 reports that that have been developed as a result of this study, would you say that there are helpful case studies, or do they contain protocols? What are we going to find if we take a look at these documents?
I think you're going to find an overview of what the SAMS process is, for sure, and so you can get an understanding of that. And again, I want to emphasize, it's like school. It's not the SAMS process. That's the central issue. It is the DNA that is in the SAMS process, which is lots of help for the principal, which Michael and Robin both talk about. You have a coach. You have a SAMS. You have first responders. I mean, it sets up supports in a way that's really powerful. It gets to the fact that principals don't have a whole ton of free time. So I think you'd see that. You see some of the instruments in there. Some of the research about instructional leadership would certainly be in there. But they're very, I think, hands-on kind of reports. They're not abstract documents.
So, Robin and Michael, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are about the SAMS process, and are these ideas new to you?
I think the SAMS process is wonderful. Because of this webinar, I've had a much greater opportunity to go and explore it more, and I really enjoy what I saw because of the design was to train other staff to be able to help and support in managerial tasks called first responders, and I really like that term. I like how you're empowering your staff, because when you look at teacher leadership, and not just teachers but staff, people like to have an opportunity for leadership on a campus. They like not necessarily to become a principal, but they like to lead from the front of the classroom or have extra roles and responsibilities to be able to support the goals and missions of the school. The other thing I really liked was the time on task shadowing, where you have some outside validation, because at the high school you may have your accreditation process about what you're doing, but at the elementary level we really don't have much of a validation process. So I like that component of it as well.
Michael?
There's a couple things that I find really intriguing about the process. I hadn't really heard about the SAM methodology here until I read the Making Time for Instructional Leadership document. Fortunately for me, I've been spending a lot of time on airplanes, so that's convenient to reading the document. But what I like about it is it takes the principal off an island, and the principal is not just solely responsible for making these decisions on his own. And I would probably say that most principals think they do a better job with instructional leadership than they really do. And I think that the SAMS process would force you to really self-evaluate and reflect on your practice, what you're actually doing. You know, I think that as a principal, I know as a principal, I spend more time in science classrooms because I have a science background and I enjoy being there. I probably spend more time with better teachers than struggling teachers. And I need to flip that around because it's easier to spend time in the classroom with those better teachers. So the whole SAM idea is very attractive to me because it appears that it's formative and that it's focused on helping teachers get better at what they do. I really dislike the role of a principal as an evaluator and taking that teacher observation and using it strictly as a way to give a grade to a teacher. I much prefer the idea of instructional leadership as being something that supports the teacher, helps them grow no matter what level they're on, and helps them improve instruction for kids. So in that way, I like it. And the other thing I like is that it focuses not just time on task teaching, but how to provide a higher level of instruction during that time that you're on task in the classroom.
Speaking of time, one of the comments that you made in the beginning of your remarks just now, Michael, really sparked a aha from Joe Murphy, and that was when you said that that a lot of principals think they're better at doing instructional leadership than they are. And I was wondering, Joe, if you could say a bit more about that. In particular, Marcy, if you could bring up the time use that Dr. Murphy provided. Can you say a little bit more about this slide, Joe, in particular as it relates to what Mike was just talking about?
Okay, I don't see the slide, but I think here's, if you go for a summative story, the principals spent in the 70s, 80s, when they first started doing the tracking, 8 to 20% of their time on instructional leadership. Mm-hmm. And there was just a ferocious effort to get that number much higher over the last 35 years. I mean, it's been in state laws, the associations have done it, everybody and their grandmother has tried to work on it, and those numbers haven't changed. So I think Michael was exactly right. And that's what's good about SAMS, I think. We need to create systems and structures that have meaning, that it's not there for themselves, that allow principals, or force principals almost, to move into that role, because I don't think it's going to magically change over the next 30 years just because we talk about it more.
But Joe, am I on mic here, Michelle?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I guess my question for Joe would be, when I look at these categories of time use, some of the things that you have listed under management tasks are things that I see as instructional leadership, because when teachers have to wait an hour to make copies, that takes away from their instructional prep time. That means that their lesson's not going to be as good as it could have been. So sometimes I view little things that I have to do that are managerial as part of building the culture where learning becomes important, and teachers know that I think that their time is valuable.
I completely agree with that. This isn't our instrument. This instrument was developed by the SAMS people, and right. I've been arguing with them for 30 years that they need to get at least get some definitions for some of these terms, because going back to what you said earlier and what I said, I think it is that 1,200 things the principal does today. If you can do that coffee thing with the rationale you just gave, that could very well be instructional. If you think it's just a matter of getting a coffee machine fixed, it's not. So I agree with your everyday eyeball on instruction. I've done it. I've seen colleagues do it where they go through budget, and it's really finance and a budget issue, and they don't have the eyeball on instruction and curriculum and assessment, and you get very different results.
So one more question for you, Joe, before we turn to questions from our listeners. And just as an aside, if folks who are attending the webinar are interested, you can pose a question in the question box, and we will be reading them out in turn. And any type of question is welcome. But Joe, the way that you were just describing instructional leadership, but as having having a perspective, how is that located, or where is that located within the new professional standards for educational leaders, formerly known as ISLIC? How do you see instructional leadership? Obviously, it's front and center in Standard 4, but how does it fit vis-a-vis the broader conception that we've just been talking about over the course of the last 45 minutes within this set of standards?
Yes, I gotta go back to where Michael was. It seems to me, and I speak with my old administrator and my research hat on here, that all great schools are anchored on two powerful concepts. One is really demandingness or challenge or academic press for kids, and the other is this powerful culture that Mike talks about. So the question is, if you can walk around all day and everything you see or do has one eyeball on the challenge and the press and one eyeball on the culture, they will come together, but you will see everything through those eyes and you will respond differently. So I would say, the way I think about these, the new standards are they're anchored by those two foundations, academic press and supportive culture. So they're just dynamically inserted across the standards.
All right. We do have one question that just popped up in the question bar, and it's from John Summers. And John recently read an article out of Education Week where there was a suggestion that really instructional leadership should be taking the back seat to business leadership. And he's wondering what your thoughts are about that. Let's maybe start with Robin.
Can you repeat that question one more time to make sure I have it?
Yeah, an article in Education Week that recently came out was talking about the importance of business leadership, or taking I'm assuming he's referring to a recent article that focused on developing educational leaders within the MBA programs. But there was a suggestion, according to John, within that article, that instructional leadership take a back seat to business leadership. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are, I do believe that building level principals are the CEO. So there are some parallels with business management, but education, I have not seen any other profession as unique as education. I think actually it could be turned the other way, that business could learn a lot from educators in how to run businesses.
Thanks, Robin. Any other thoughts from either Mike or Joe on that particular question?
I love what Robin said, and I would echo her comments exactly. I can think back to my principal's preparation programs when we were learning about total quality management and how TQM impacted the business world. Well, I think what's good in business is not always what's good in schools. We're really focused on a people-driven relationship from top to bottom, and everything needs to be, in my opinion, needs to be focused on students and learning and how do we create relationships, because relationships are what's valuable, and those relationships that administrators have with teachers and students trump everything else when it comes down to learning.
And I think if you've read any of the work by Jamie Fulmer, he's the one that came out with the blueberry story with ice cream, that in business, the question was asked, what do you do with your inferior product? And they discard it. In education, we accept all, we take all, and we build them to their greatest level of depth and character that we can. So similarities sometimes with some managerial things, but very different when you're talking about what we actually do and what our outcomes and goals are.
Thanks a bunch. We also had a question from Keith Hollenbeck, who I believe is at the University of Oregon, and Keith was asking about district size. So he noted that it was mentioned that small district administrators typically have to do more with less, but the examples that we've talked about today tend towards larger districts that have more resources. So how does the SAM model differentiate by district size? Joe, do you know whether or not that was spoken to within the report?
No, I don't remember a change. The only thing is that they would have more than one first responder. They have more people doing things.
Mm-hmm.
And the things I want to add to what Robin said earlier, it's not just getting teachers to lead. Kids can do most of the stuff that teachers and administrators do in the school, or a lot of them. So, for example, there's a school I know right now that's getting their freshmen and sophomores are actually in charge of the defibrillation in the school, and they've worked with the emergency crew, and they've got training. So if there's a problem, it's the student who steps forward and takes care of the problem. My guess is if we had that eyeball on a lot of things, we would find a lot of opportunities to get kids involved and give them meaningful leadership activities as well.
Mm-hmm. So not just distributing to your teachers and other staff members, but also distributing leadership among the students. Interesting.
Yeah, Michael, his point is, it is culture, it is relationships, and if kids aren't known, cared for, respected, have opportunity to be a member and lead in the school, they're not going anywhere. So I think this is exactly right. It is part of the instructional role. I've seen 7th graders in charge of 1st graders on reading assignments and other things. And it's just beautiful. And they do a great job. They're trained. So there's a lot we can get, I think, in terms of building instructional leadership by actually thinking about the clients who we take care of as members of the strategy to get it done as well.
So we have a related question from Yasmin Hashmi that maybe either Robin or Mike, you might be able to answer. Her question is, how is instructional leadership supported among your teachers who coach other teachers? Are there implications for the SAMS process there?
I know at our school, what I've seen is that our teachers really enjoy that opportunity to be able to have chance, not only the more experienced teachers, but we've got some stellar young teachers coming out with some wonderful new strategies that they implement. Teachers enjoy that time to collaborate and to be able to share what's learning on behalf of all kids. So I think the SAMS project, of what I know about it, the process, would support that, and that would be a very sound strategy.
Yeah, I'll go along with Robin. I think part of this, and I'm not sure this is intentional in the SAMS process, but I think that in a smaller school district, a principal who doesn't have content area background in a certain subject area could use those mentor teachers to help supplement not only his own knowledge, but the knowledge of a novice teacher. And then the flip side of that is what Robin was saying. We're having some dynamic young people come into our schools with huge technology skills, and they're really able to relate those things to older teachers, or more experienced teachers, and to help them develop their practice as well.
Going a bit more into detail, one of the idea of taking a lens or putting an eyeball, as Dr. Murphy mentioned, on all the things that you do. One of our listeners, Laura Fennell, has asked the question, in shifting your time to more instructional leadership, what things do you have to let go of? What do you have to reduce your attention on in order to ensure that you have enough attention on instructional leadership work? And she also wonders whether or not, as you've, Robin and Michael, as you've begun to do this, have you seen any negative impact as a result?
If you don't mind, Mike, I'll jump on that one quick.
Go ahead, Rob.
One of the things that I would recommend, Mike already touched on, is calendaring his day. That's been the biggest key, so I haven't had to give up something. I was just better use of my time. My secretary and I are very much in sync. She knows what my goals are for the day, and she helps me stay on task. Mike talked about how his assistant principal and he do a very similar process at his school. The other thing is it's forced me to give up some leadership, which has been great because, again, like we talked about, staff, parents, students, teachers, they want those leadership opportunities. So we've been able to build the capacity on our campus, and so it's been some shared leadership, which I think just empowers your building to a greater level. So I think we're a better school because of the time that I'm spending in the classroom. And the staff is doing a wonderful job. Parents and the kids love their roles as well. So I think it's only been a benefit, and calendaring and coaching opportunities, those have been key.
And I would just add one other thing. Discussing and utilizing my assistant principal to a greater role in instruction has been a valuable thing, not only in his development as a leader, but also in easing some of the burden on me directly as the building principal. So we share that responsibility together, and that we use our strength areas, and we know where our strengths are, and we know which areas we have weaknesses in, and then we play those off of each other.
Kind of a more big picture question has come from Michelle Acker-Hosevar at Washington State University. And her question is directed towards all three of you, but she notes that Dr. Murphy used the words powerful culture. And she's real interested in understanding what you all think this looks like. What are the dimensions of a powerful culture?
Want me to start?
Sure.
Okay. Well, I think if you look at the standards, they're in there. Powerful culture is a concept that washes over, cascades over, if you will, everybody in the school, in the community. So if you're going to build positive culture, you have to have that with parents in your community. And that, you have to ask yourself, are we in the PR business or the selling business, or are we in the engagement and collaboration business? And I think when we ask ourselves the hard question around that, we're often in the PR and selling business. But if you want a positive culture, you have to start there. You have to build the same thing for teachers. Mike and Robin both talked about that. And you have to have it for kids. It's very simple. The idea is every principal has an academic wall in their school, on the computer or somewhere, and they can tell you where every child is in every subject, and to the T, right? But no one has a wall for culture or caring in their school. So the issue is, unless we start taking the norms of positive culture seriously and put them on the wall the same way we put reading and science and mathematics and history and social studies, and then track, you should be able to go to that wall, go down and find Harriet Smith, go across and see what leadership opportunities Harriet Smith had in this school in the fall semester. And if there's no mark there, it would be like not doing well in mathematics, right? Or you would be able to say, if you want to help kids and the culture, I mean, the easiest thing to do is make sure they're all in a meaningful extracurricular activity on the hip of an adult. So if that's not on your wall, if you're on the wall and you go down and you find Joe Murphy and you go across and say, wow, that Murphy's never been in extracurricular activity. Job of the school is to get me in a meaningful extracurricular activity. Simple as that. But if we don't track those critical norms and those critical measures the same way we track academic measures, they will be very, very unlikely to appear in your schools.
Robin, Mike, any amens or that sort of thing?
I think there are some things we don't track them as every student as we do in data, But I think if you walk into a lot of our schools, especially those schools where you feel the culture, you feel a positive vibe once you walk in, that we do have kids' pictures, names on the walls for good character. Those students who are ambassadors within our school, our student leaders, our National Junior or Elementary Honor Society, our principal's honor roll. We have all the extracurricular, we have 14 clubs on our campus, and all the pictures of those students who participate in those clubs are on there. And then one of the things that we do also to try to catch all kids is we do I stand for in a faculty meeting. So every staff member will stand for 1 to 2 kids every year. And that means that they're going to mentor them, take them under their wing. And those might be the kids that you might think would fall through the cracks without having that adult support on campus. So those are some of the things that we do try to do for a positive culture on campus and highlight all kids, not just based on academics.
And the only thing I would push on Robin is you need, if I come to the school next month and I say, give me the evidence that this is true, you can do that. The same way you could tell me that your kids were in the 72nd percentile in mathematics.
That's right. You walk down the halls and you'll see their pictures and names. We've got rockets shooting up of kids that are making their own personal goals, and not just on academics, but it's also on behavior and whatever their goals are. So it's not just academically based.
Well, we have multiple additional questions, but we've almost run out of time. So I would like to just ask our panelists if you have any final remarks that you would like to make, or if you have any advice that you would like to share with new principals who are just starting out in the profession and are really trying to work hard to make more time for instruction.
I'll go first. I'll have a brief comment, and that is simply, as a principal, get off your island. You don't have to do this by yourself. You can engage other people in the instructional leadership of your building, and you need to be willing and open to take feedback and their recommendations, and you will improve what goes on in your school. Thanks.
And I'm going to say that I think the SAM process will help you with a balanced work and personal life, which is so important to longevity. We need our administrators. We need great teachers in our schools. And if we can have more of a shared leadership or a SAM process, the health and wellness of our principals is going to improve, and we're going to keep them around for a lot longer. So thank you for bringing this to the forefront and letting us talk about it today.
Super. Joe, any last words?
Yeah, I would say this for principals. Every principal has on his or her desk a pile of work that has to be done. Take off all the stuff on the top and put it on the bottom, because you're not going to get to it anyway, and put the stuff that's instructionally oriented and climate and culturally oriented on the top, and you will get to it. And the dilemma for us as a profession, we've had to do or thought we had to do everything under the sun before we could undertake our other responsibilities, and I don't think that's going to work for us. And you know, people will get upset, but I tell you, it's much rather to have the transportation people upset than it is to have the kids not learning.
Absolutely.
Amen.
Well, we've reached the end of today's webinar on instructional leadership in real-world school settings, and I'd like to thank our guests once more for joining us today. Thanks so much, Robin, Michael, and Joe, for contributing to a really rich discussion on instructional leadership in the SAMS process. I'd also like to thank all of you who asked important questions and extended our thinking on this issue. I'm really sorry that we haven't had a chance to get to all of the questions, but I imagine that our panelists would be happy to entertain any questions you might have if you'd like to email them as a follow-up. Finally, I'd like to thank the Wallace Foundation for supporting today's webinar. For those of you who have attended today's webinar, I remind you that a full recording will be available next Wednesday at the UCA website, www.uca.org, and we encourage you to share it with your colleagues. Goodbye, everybody, and we hope you all have a really pleasant week. Take care.